5 years ago, HOA President Vivian Blackwood stood on the cracked dock of my $5 lake shack, pointed a manicured finger, and cackled like a witch on Halloween. Her cheap perfume mixed with the stench of her arrogance still clings to the memory. "Enjoy your rotting fishing shed, trailer trash," she sneered. "You'll be on your knees begging us to take it back within a year." Fast forward to today. That worthless pile of splintered wood and rusted nails just appraised at $5.2 million. Prime lakefront property, baby, sunset views, private beach, the kind of land developers drool over. Now the stomach-churning twist. Vivian is spearheading a fraudulent lawsuit, waving forged documents that claim the land rightfully belongs to the HOA community. She's trying to steal a multi-million-dollar estate because the guy she once mocked as trailer trash just became richer than her entire gated, golf cart-riding, Chardonnay-sipping neighborhood. She thought she was erasing an eyesore. Instead, she handed me the keys to her worst nightmare. You'd lose your mind too if this happened to you. Share your HOA disaster story below and tell me where you're watching from. My name is Garrett Morrison, and 6 years ago, my life imploded faster than a controlled demolition. 34, freshly divorced with half my savings and a serious case of trust issues. 12 years as a Navy mechanic had taught me to fix jet engines and hydraulic systems, but apparently not broken marriages. After my ex drove off with our good furniture, I stared at $15,000, my grandfather's final gift. His note read, "Buy something that makes you happy, son." Problem was, 15 grand doesn't buy much happiness these days. So I did what any rational person does during a midlife crisis. I started driving. Montana called to me like a siren song. Those endless skies and mountain air promised a man could actually breathe. Following back roads and forgotten highways, I found myself circling Pine Lake, where the water stretched like polished glass and pine trees whispered secrets older than my bloodline. That's when I spotted the hand-painted "For Sale by Owner" sign, barely visible through wild roses and knee-high weeds. The property was a beautiful disaster, 50 feet of prime lakefront with a cabin that looked like it had been assembled by a committee of drunk beavers. Weathered siding hung at gravity-defying angles. The roof had more gaps than teeth in a hockey player's smile, and the dock groaned under its own weight. But the smell hit me first, cedar mixed with lake water and old wood that had absorbed decades of fishing stories. I was home before I knew it. The seller was Martha Kingsley, 78, with arthritis-gnarled hands and eyes that still twinkled with mischief. "Built this with my husband in 1952, she said, her voice carrying the tremor of 8 Montana winters. "4 kids, countless fish, and more memories than I can carry." She gestured with a coffee-stained mug toward the lake. "But the family wants me in supervised living now." Air quotes, eye roll, the whole rebellious teenager act. $5. Cash, as is, no questions. She just wanted someone who'd love it instead of bulldoze it. Then came the sound that still makes my skin crawl, the aggressive purr of Vivian Blackwood's pristine white Escalade. Those Blackwood Realty decals gleamed like warning signs as she emerged in designer jeans that cost more than my truck payment, manicured nails clicking against her phone like tiny weapons. Vivian was maybe 52, with salon-perfect blonde hair and the kind of confidence that comes from never hearing no. She wielded her clipboard like a sword and wore her HOA president badge like a crown. "Martha, honey," she purred, voice dripping artificial sweetness. "I see you're entertaining visitors." She looked me over like something she'd scrape off her shoe, work boots, faded navy shirt, general lack of trust fund. "This is Garrett," Martha said, steel creeping into her voice. "He's buying the property." Vivian's smile could have frozen hell over. "Oh, how interesting." She flipped through her clipboard with theatrical precision. "I hope you've explained about the upcoming HOA requirements, Martha. This entire area is being upgraded." The way she said upgraded made my Navy-trained bullshit detector start screaming. "What kind of requirements?" I asked. "Well," Vivian's eyes gleamed like a shark spotting blood. "Architectural standards, landscaping compliance, structural improvements, probably 50, 60,000 in mandatory updates." She paused for maximum impact. "Minimum." Martha's face went pale. "You never mentioned—" "Oh, didn't I?" Vivian's laugh was pure poison. "How silly of me. But don't worry, Martha. Blackwood Realty would be happy to handle a quick sale to more appropriate buyers. Save everyone the hassle." The smell of her overpowering perfume mixed with the stench of obvious corruption made my stomach turn. Right then, I knew 2 things. I was buying this property, and this woman was going to be a problem. I pulled out my cashier's check with a smile that probably matched hers for pure malice. "Sounds perfect," I said. "I love a good project." 3 weeks after moving into my lakefront disaster, I learned something every property owner should burn into their brain. Always check when your HOA was actually formed. Vivian's certified mail invitation to an emergency meeting about non-compliant structures should have been my first clue that I was about to get an education in small-town corruption. The community center reeked of industrial carpet and the collective anxiety of 30 confused homeowners crammed into folding chairs. Vivian stood at the podium like a dictator addressing her subjects, wielding a remote control with the confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, voice dripping with fake authority, "we have a crisis that threatens everything we've built in Crystal Shore Estates." The projector screen descended with a mechanical whir that sounded like impending doom. My jaw nearly hit the floor. The first slide showed my cabin, but photographed like a crime scene. Shadows emphasized every weathered board. Strategic angles made the dock look ready to collapse, and somehow they'd managed to make 50-year-old cedar siding look like rotting cardboard. "These unauthorized structures," Vivian continued with the enthusiasm of a prosecutor seeking the death penalty, "violate our 2019 architectural guidelines. Required improvements total $50,000. Daily fines of $500 begin immediately." Margaret in the back row raised her hand. "Didn't that property exist before we had an HOA?" Vivian's smile could have frozen antifreeze. "All properties must conform to current standards regardless of age." That's when my grandfather's voice echoed in my head. "Son, when someone's trying to railroad you, hit them with facts so hard they see stars." I stood up, manila folder in hand, feeling like David walking toward Goliath, if David had 12 years of military training and a serious grudge. "I'd like to clarify something," I said, walking to the front while the room went church mouse quiet. My boots crunched on carpet that felt like walking on crushed dreams. "These are 1952 property records," I announced, opening the folder like I was revealing state secrets. "Martha Kingsley's deed explicitly grandfathers all existing structures. Your HOA was incorporated in 2018, 66 years after this cabin was built." The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Vivian's perfect composure developed hairline cracks. "Technicalities don't override." "Actually, they do." I pulled out document number 2, remembering something my divorce lawyer once told me. The devil's always in the details, and details always win. Montana property law is crystal clear. HOAs have zero authority over pre-existing structures. Not some authority, not limited authority. Zero. Whispers erupted like popcorn in a hot pan. I caught fragments. Nobody told us about grandfathered rights, and are we getting scammed? But here's where things got really interesting. I'd done my homework, something Vivian clearly hadn't expected from the trailer trash buying a fishing shack. "There's more," I said, savoring the way Vivian's eyes started twitching. "This development required an environmental impact study for lakefront construction. The county has no record of one being filed." Margaret looked like someone had told her Christmas was canceled. "What does that mean?" "It means this entire HOA might be illegal. Every fee paid, every fine issued, every rule enforced, potentially worthless paper." Vivian's hand slammed the podium with a crack that echoed like breaking bones. "Meeting adjourned. Everyone out." Too late. The cat was out of the bag, shredding furniture and demanding explanations. Residents clustered in angry groups, voices rising with each revelation. The smell of Vivian's panic sweat mixed with her expensive perfume created an aroma like desperation wrapped in designer cologne. As the crowd dispersed, she cornered me near the exit, her manicured nails clicking against her clipboard like tiny hammers of doom. "You think you're clever," she hissed, voice barely above a whisper but sharp enough to cut steel. "But you have no idea what you're dealing with. Let's see how smart you feel when the bank forecloses." I handed her my business card, something I'd learned to do in the Navy when dealing with officers who thought they were smarter than they actually were. "Garrett Morrison, licensed general contractor, property restoration specialist. Call me if you need help understanding building codes." Her fingers crushed the card like she was strangling my future. The next morning, I woke to the musical sound of rushing water, specifically my water line being accidentally severed by an HOA landscaping crew. Derek Blackwood stood over the gushing pipe with a shovel, grinning like he'd just discovered buried treasure. That's when I learned the second crucial lesson about fighting corruption. Always have cameras rolling, lots of them. Because when people start playing dirty, documentation becomes your best friend and their worst nightmare. Game on, I thought, reaching for my phone to start recording. If they wanted to escalate, I'd show them what a real escalation looked like. The following week brought my first masterclass in spotting fake legal documents, a skill I never thought I'd need until Derek Blackwood decided to cosplay as a lawyer. The cease and desist letter arrived via FedEx, all official-looking with letterhead that screamed, "I definitely went to law school, trust me." Notice of violation and demand for compliance, it declared in bold letters that probably took Derek half an hour to center. Unauthorized renovations violate community character standards. Daily fines of $500 commence immediately until full compliance achieved. The signature read, Derek Blackwood ESQ, Legal Counsel for Crystal Shore Estates HOA. I laughed so hard coffee shot through my nose, which burned, by the way, but was worth it. This letter had all the legal authority of a fortune cookie. My divorce lawyer had taught me that real legal documents smell different. They use specific language, cite actual statutes, and generally make sense. This read like Derek had Googled how to sound lawyerly and called it a day. A quick call to the Montana Bar Association confirmed my suspicions. Derek Blackwood wasn't licensed to practice law anywhere. Practicing without a license is a felony that comes with serious jail time, something I filed away for future reference. Meanwhile, renovation work continued. My grandfather always said, if you're going to do something, do it right the first time or you'll be doing it again in 5 years. So I did exactly that. Cedar shakes that would outlast Montana winters, plumbing that wouldn't freeze when hell itself went cold, and an expanded deck where I could watch sunrise paint the lake gold every morning. Every receipt, every permit, every inspection got filed like I was preparing for an IRS audit. When dealing with people who think rules don't apply to them, paperwork becomes your bulletproof vest. That's when Vivian decided to redraw reality itself. Tuesday morning brought a nervous surveyor clutching his clipboard like a security blanket. By noon, bright orange stakes sprouted along my property line like toxic mushrooms. Except these stakes had mysteriously moved my boundaries inward by 10 feet. Suddenly, my dock extended into community waterfront. The acrid smell of wet paint on those stakes told me everything. Real survey markers don't get painted overnight by helpful elves. Those stakes appeared faster than lies at a campaign rally, I told Martha when she called, voice shaking with worry. She'd lived here 70 years and knew every tree, every rock, every blade of grass. I hired my own surveyor, Bill Henderson, a weathered Montana native who'd been mapping property since before satellites made it easy. Bill took one look at the orange stakes and started chuckling like he'd heard the world's best joke. "Son," he said, running calloused fingers along the rough bark of a century-old pine marking my actual corner. "Whoever placed these stakes either can't read a compass or thinks trees migrate with the seasons. Ancient survey marks carved into that pine told the real story. Your property line runs 15 feet past their markers. Hell, you own more land than you thought." But here's where things got really interesting, and this is something every waterfront property owner should tattoo on their brain. My original 1950s deed included riparian rights, exclusive water access, permanent dock privileges, even fishing rights that superseded any future development. Vivian wasn't just wrong about my boundaries. She was trying to steal 70-year-old legal rights. At the next community meeting, I watched Vivian's face cycle through the entire color spectrum as Bill presented his findings. The collective gasp when residents saw the real survey sounded like air escaping from a punctured life raft. "Ma'am," Bill said in his no-nonsense drawl, "your surveyor needs either new equipment or a new profession. These markers are off by enough to park a semi-truck." That got everyone's attention. Margaret in the back row looked like she'd discovered her house was built on quicksand. "How do we know our boundaries are correct?" Before Vivian could spin damage control, I jumped in. "County records are public. Every original deed is filed and available. 20 minutes, $5, peace of mind. Best investment you'll ever make." Vivian's folder slammed shut with the crack of breaking bones. She stormed out, heels clicking on linoleum like an angry woodpecker attacking a metal roof. Retaliation came swift and stupid. Next morning, my power got cut for safety concerns. 6 anonymous calls reported gas leaks at my property, all within 30 minutes, all describing identical emergency situations. The utility worker who showed up looked embarrassed enough to crawl under his truck. "Sorry, sir. Protocol says we respond to emergency reports, even when they smell fishier than a tuna cannery." I handed him my phone, security footage already loaded, showing Derek making those calls from his truck parked across the street. "Looks like your concerned citizen really cares about my safety," I said. The worker watched Derek's performance, shook his head, and muttered something about people with too much time and too few brain cells. Game, set, and match. Round 2 to me. Time to document everything and prepare for whatever came next. Vivian's next move came wrapped in the kind of bureaucratic language that makes honest people's wallets cry. A special community assessment notice arrived in every resident's mailbox, demanding $2,000 per household to fund legal action protecting community property values from non-conforming structures. The genius part? The assessment only applied to properties negatively affected by ongoing violations. Basically, everyone except Vivian's immediate neighbors got hit with the bill. Nothing subtle about targeting anyone who'd shown me support at the meetings. I was sipping my morning coffee on the deck, watching mist rise off the lake like ghosts of better times, when Margaret knocked on my door. She looked like she hadn't slept in a week, clutching the assessment notice like it might bite her. "Garrett," she said, voice trembling with exhaustion and frustration, "my husband's on a fixed income. We can't afford this." Behind her stood 3 other neighbors, all looking like they'd been sentenced to financial execution. That's when everything clicked into place. Vivian wasn't just harassing me, she was using HOA authority to squeeze out anyone who couldn't afford her games. Classic predatory behavior disguised as community management. "Has anyone else noticed a pattern here?" I asked, inviting them onto the deck. The morning air smelled like pine needles and impending justice. Vivian harasses property owners until they sell cheap, then her real estate company swoops in with below-market offers. It's a protection racket with better landscaping. Margaret's husband Frank nodded grimly. The Hendersons sold last year, after 6 months of violation notices. Vivian's company bought their place for 30% under market value. I'd stumbled onto something bigger than personal vendetta. Systematic fraud designed to manipulate property sales for profit. Every homeowner should know this red flag. When HOA enforcement targets specific owners while ignoring identical violations elsewhere, you're probably looking at corruption. But Vivian wasn't done escalating. The next week brought an emergency health hazard claim that would have impressed a Hollywood screenwriter. According to her official complaint, my septic system was contaminating Crystal Lake and endangering the entire community. She demanded immediate evacuation and soil remediation. Estimated cost, $40,000. The irony was thicker than Montana honey. My septic system had been professionally inspected and upgraded just months earlier. The real pollution source? The HOA's own landscaping company had been dumping chemical fertilizers and pesticides directly into storm drains that fed the lake. I hired an independent environmental testing company, something every property owner should do when facing contamination claims, because the truth always shows up in the lab results. The water samples told a story Vivian definitely didn't want published. My property tested cleaner than a mountain spring, while the HOA's maintenance practices were turning the lake into a chemical soup. Armed with scientific evidence that could end careers, I did what any reasonable person would do. I shared it with everyone via social media. Facebook, Instagram, even created a TikTok video showing crystal clear water from my shoreline versus the algae-choked mess near the community boat ramp. The response was swift and brutal. Within hours, my post had been shared across 3 counties. Environmental groups started asking questions. Local news stations began sniffing around. The health department announced they'd be testing all lakefront properties. Vivian's public meltdown happened at the community pool during what was supposed to be a casual summer gathering. I was grilling burgers for anyone hungry enough to brave my cooking when I heard her voice rising above the splash of kids swimming and the low hum of adult conversation. "This is insane!" she screamed at a cluster of residents who'd been discussing water quality test results. "You idiots don't understand what you're losing here." The pool area went cemetery quiet. Even the kids stopped splashing to stare. "We had a $50 million development deal," Vivian continued, alcohol and fury loosening her tongue like a broken faucet. "Hotels, restaurants, jobs for everyone. But no, you want to protect one man's fishing shack." That's when she revealed the crown jewel of corruption. She'd been skimming HOA maintenance funds to pay legal fees for her development schemes. 3 years of stolen money, fake invoices, and embezzled community resources. Margaret stood up from her poolside chair, water dripping from her swimsuit, and spoke with the authority of someone who'd finally had enough. "So you've been stealing our money to steal his property?" The sharp crack of Vivian's wine glass shattering against concrete sounded like the final nail in her political coffin. Red wine spread across the pool deck like spilled blood, mixing with chlorine to create an aroma that perfectly captured the moment. Expensive, toxic, and impossible to clean up completely. "I was protecting property values," Vivian shrieked as several residents started pulling out their phones to record her confession. making us all rich, but you're too stupid to see it. By the end of the week, a petition demanding HOA financial audits had collected enough signatures to trigger state oversight. Residents who'd been afraid to speak up suddenly found their voices, sharing stories of harassment and manipulation that painted a picture of systemic abuse. The revolution had begun, and it smelled like justice mixed with chlorine and broken dreams. 3 days after Vivian's poolside meltdown, Martha called with a voice that carried 70 years of secrets and the tremor of someone about to drop a nuclear bomb. "Garrett, honey, you need to come over right now. I found something in Harold's papers that changes absolutely everything." Harold was Martha's late husband, the man who'd built my cabin when lakefront property cost less than a decent horse. I drove to Martha's assisted living facility expecting maybe some old construction photos or forgotten receipts. What I found instead was a legal time bomb that explained why Vivian had been acting like a rabid Wolverine with a law degree. Martha's apartment smelled like lavender potpourri mixed with the musty sweetness of old documents, the kind of smell that makes you think of attics and family secrets. She sat at her tiny kitchen table surrounded by manila folders, her arthritic fingers trembling as she pointed to a yellowed page like she was identifying a murder weapon. "This is Harold's original 1950 deed," she whispered, voice barely audible above the hum of her ancient refrigerator. I never bothered with the fine print before. Big mistake. I read the faded typewriter text, my coffee growing cold as my blood pressure skyrocketed. Buried in paragraph 17, hidden like a landmine in legal jargon, was a reversion clause. If the property was ever abandoned for 18 consecutive months or officially condemned by county authorities, ownership would automatically revert to Flathead County for public use and benefit. Holy shit. Vivian hadn't been trying to annoy me into leaving. She'd been systematically attempting to trigger abandonment so the county could seize my property. Once the government had it, they could auction it off to predetermined buyers at fire sale prices. It was legal theft disguised as bureaucratic procedure. "But wait," Martha said with the timing of a seasoned storyteller. "There's more." She pulled out a manila envelope marked confidential in Harold's careful handwriting. The contents made my hands shake like I'd grabbed a live electrical wire. A confidential real estate listing from 2019 described my exact lot as a premium development site pending municipal acquisition. Architectural blueprints showed a boutique resort and restaurant complex designed specifically for my 50 feet of waterfront paradise. Projected revenue over 10 years, $50 million. The listing agent, Blackwood Realty. The potential buyer, a hotel development company owned by Vivian's brother-in-law. I felt like someone had just explained how magic tricks work. Once you see it, you can't believe you missed something so obvious. "Harold always kept copies of everything," Martha said, tears cutting tracks down her weathered cheeks. "Said people like Vivian would come eventually. The lake's too beautiful to stay peaceful forever." The timeline clicked together like clockwork designed by a sadistic genius. HOA incorporation in 2018 to create harassment mechanisms. Derek's fake legal threats to drain my resources through costly defense. Environmental claims to trigger condemnation procedures. Every violation, every fine, every sleepless night had been calculated steps toward forced abandonment. "Martha," I said, my voice sounding strange in my own ears, "how long have I been living there?" She consulted a wall calendar covered in doctor appointments and bridge game dates. 14 months, give or take. 4 months. I had exactly 4 months before the 18-month abandonment trigger. If Vivian could force me out through bankruptcy, harassment, or any other means, the reversion clause would activate like a legal nuclear weapon. "One more thing," Martha said, producing a final document that stopped my heart completely. "This is why I sold so fast." A letter from Vivian, dated 3 weeks before my purchase, warning Martha that county condemnation was inevitable due to environmental violations, and offering to facilitate a quick sale to minimize legal complications. Martha had been terrorized into believing seizure was coming anyway. She'd practically given me the property because she thought she was saving me from government theft. Now I understood the real game. Time to beat them at it. Knowledge is power, but organized knowledge is a nuclear weapon. I converted my cabin's back room into what Martha dubbed mission control, walls covered with timelines, financial records, and enough photographic evidence to make a conspiracy theorist weep with joy. The room smelled like fresh coffee, printer ink, and the sweet aroma of impending justice. Martha became my secret weapon, bringing boxes of Harold's meticulously kept records spanning 7 decades. The woman had turned into a 78-year-old investigative journalist, arriving each morning with new discoveries and a thermos of coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Harold documented everything, she explained, spreading yellowed receipts across my makeshift war room table. Property taxes, boundary surveys, even correspondence with county officials. He said bureaucrats lie, but paper remembers forever. My first call was to Rebecca Santos, a property rights attorney who specialized in cases where David had to fight Goliath, and Goliath was usually wearing a business suit and carrying fraudulent documents. Rebecca's office walls were covered with victory photos, small property owners who'd beaten corporations, developers, and corrupt officials. "This is beautiful," Rebecca said, reviewing Martha's evidence with the enthusiasm of a treasure hunter finding actual treasure. Reversion clause fraud, HOA and corporation violations, practicing law without a license. It's like Christmas morning for a civil rights attorney. Our strategy crystallized into 3 coordinated attacks. First, file harassment complaints against the entire HOA board, documenting the pattern of targeted enforcement that violated fair housing laws. Second, challenge the HOA's legal formation through evidence of falsified incorporation documents. Third, countersue for damages while demanding a complete financial audit of every penny that had passed through HOA accounts. Here's something every homeowner facing HOA harassment should tattoo on their brain. Document patterns, not just individual incidents. Single violations can be explained away, but systematic targeting reveals intent to discriminate. Community organizing happened naturally once people realized they weren't alone in Vivian's crosshairs. Our weekly meetings moved from my deck to accommodate growing crowds. 15 residents sharing stories that painted a picture of systematic abuse stretching back 3 years. Frank, Margaret's husband, brought a leather notebook filled with dates and details of every violation notice they'd received. Grass too long, mailbox wrong color, car parked in our own driveway for more than 24 hours, he read, voice shaking with suppressed rage. 67 violations in 18 months. Our neighbors got 0. The financial investigation revealed corruption so blatant it was almost artistic. A forensic accountant named David Blair, recommended by Rebecca, analyzed 3 years of HOA records with the precision of a surgeon and the enthusiasm of a detective solving a murder case. $340,000 in maintenance fees diverted to Blackwood Realty accounts, David announced during one of our deck meetings, his laptop screen glowing in the evening light. Fake invoices for landscaping services never performed, security patrols that existed only on paper, and my personal favorite, Derek billing $47,000 for legal consulting without any law degree or professional credentials. The evidence was so overwhelming that even Vivian's supporters started questioning their loyalty. When people realize they've been paying for someone else's vacation fund, community solidarity develops pretty quickly. Media strategy came together when Sally Blair, an investigative reporter from Billings, caught wind of our story through social media. Sally had built her career exposing small-town corruption, and our case had everything she loved: clear villains, sympathetic victims, and documents that proved everything. "This story has legs," Sally said during our first interview, her recorder sitting between us on the picnic table like a tiny truth machine. "HOA corruption is exploding statewide. Your case could be the catalyst for real reform." We agreed to hold the story until maximum impact, specifically the night before Vivian's emergency HOA meeting where she planned to demand my immediate removal. Property improvements continued strategically, each project designed to prove permanent residence and long-term investment. Solar panel installation with visible permits and county inspections. Garden expansion with perennial plantings that screamed, "I'm staying forever." Even a new mailbox with Morrison Residence S 2,020 inches engraved in weatherproof bronze. Every improvement was photographed, documented, and filed like evidence in a court case, because that's exactly what it would become. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. I started letting Vivian overhear phone calls about mounting legal costs, strategic conversations at the coffee shop about maybe this isn't worth the hassle, and carefully planted rumors about considering quick sale options. The coffee shop became our intelligence center, a place where gossip flowed faster than espresso, and Vivian's spies reported every overheard conversation. The bitter taste of deliberately weak coffee matched my performance anxiety perfectly as I played the role of a man slowly breaking under pressure. Meanwhile, my real allies were building an unbreakable case. County building inspectors confirmed no actual violations existed. Environmental officers verified that my property was cleaner than most. Even the fire marshal admitted he'd been pressured by prominent citizens to find problems that weren't there. 3 weeks before the annual HOA meeting, everything was ready. Evidence organized, media prepared, allies coordinated. The only question left was whether Vivian would hang herself with enough rope or if we'd need to hand her some more. Desperation makes people stupid, and Vivian Blackwood was about to prove that theory in spectacular fashion. The private meeting request came through Derek, who knocked on my door looking like he'd rather be anywhere else on planet Earth. His usual swagger had been replaced by the nervous energy of someone delivering a message from the devil herself. "Vivian wants to meet," he said, avoiding eye contact like I was Medusa in work boots. "Says she has a business proposition." The meeting location was neutral territory, the Rusty Anchor, a diner that smelled like bacon grease and broken dreams where truckers and tourists mixed with locals who'd given up on life sometime around the Clinton administration. Vivian sat in a corner booth wearing designer clothes that screamed, "I definitely didn't embezzle money to afford this outfit." She slid a manila envelope across the Formica table like we were exchanging state secrets. Her hands shook just enough to make the ice cubes in her water glass clink like wind chimes in a nervous breeze. $100,000, she said without preamble, voice carrying the desperation of someone betting their last poker chip. "Cash, right now. No questions asked, no lawyers involved. You pack up, disappear, and this whole nightmare ends for everyone." The envelope was thick enough to choke a horse, filled with crisp hundreds that smelled like desperation and ATM machines. I'd never seen that much cash in one place, and for about 3 seconds I understood why people take bribes. Then my grandfather's voice echoed in my head. "Son, if someone's willing to pay you to go away, you're sitting on something worth 10 times what they're offering." "Interesting proposal," I said, pushing the envelope back across the table. "What makes you think I want to leave?" Vivian's mask slipped just enough to reveal the panic underneath. "Look, Garrett, can I call you Garrett? I'm trying to help you here. The legal costs alone will bankrupt you. County commissioners are already discussing condemnation procedures. You could fight this for years and lose everything." That's when my hidden camera, a tiny device Rebecca had suggested I carry everywhere, captured something that would make prosecutors weep with joy. Vivian began confessing to 3 years of systematic harassment, inadvertently admitting that the hotel development plans were already in final approval stages with county planning boards. "The commissioners are on board," she continued, leaning forward like she was sharing nuclear launch codes. "Property taxes will triple next year to fund infrastructure improvements that benefit the resort project. You can't win this fight, but you can walk away rich." I almost laughed. She was confirming everything we'd suspected: bribery, conspiracy, abuse of municipal authority, while offering me hush money to keep quiet about it. It was like watching someone dig their own grave with a gold-plated shovel. "What if I refuse?" I asked, genuinely curious about how far down this rabbit hole went. Her smile turned arctic. "Then you'll discover that life around here can become very complicated. Septic problems, electrical issues, maybe some concerns about structural integrity that require extensive inspections. Montana winters can be brutal when your utilities keep experiencing mysterious failures. Pure extortion, recorded in high-definition audio with timestamp verification. Rebecca would probably frame this conversation and hang it in her office. The escalation began immediately after I walked away from her blood money. Within days, the harassment campaign shifted into overdrive with the subtlety of a Viking raid. My water service got disconnected due to contamination concerns that existed only in Vivian's imagination. The health inspector, a nervous man who kept apologizing for just following orders, condemned my property as uninhabitable due to environmental hazards. The smell of disconnected pipes and the metallic taste of anger filled my mouth as I documented each violation. Every fraudulent notice, every bogus inspection, every manufactured crisis got photographed, timestamped, and added to our growing mountain of evidence. Then Derek escalated to physical intimidation, proving that stupidity runs in the Blackwood family gene pool. The confrontation happened in the grocery store parking lot, where he accidentally rammed my truck with his oversized pickup while I was loading groceries. "Watch where you're walking around here," he said, climbing out of his truck like some discount brand action hero. "Accidents happen to people who don't know when to quit." The security cameras captured everything: the deliberate impact, his threatening words, even the moment when he realized what he'd done, and panic flashed across his face like neon lights advertising stupidity. But here's where things got really interesting. The fake court summons arrived the next day, delivered by Derek wearing what looked suspiciously like a sheriff's deputy uniform. The document ordered me to appear for emergency property seizure hearings and created enough panic among my supporters that several called asking if I'd already lost. Document analysis revealed something beautiful. Derek had been impersonating a law enforcement officer, which carries federal penalties that make practicing law without a license look like a parking ticket. Every move they made dug their hole deeper, while I sat back documenting everything like a scientist studying the mating habits of particularly stupid criminals. The trap was working perfectly. They were destroying themselves faster than I ever could. Armed guards patrolling a residential neighborhood is either a sign of impending war or complete desperation. In Vivian's case, it was definitely the latter. The private security showed up Monday morning. 2 guys who looked like they'd been rejected from mall cop training for being too aggressive. They wore tactical vests that probably came from military surplus stores and carried flashlights like they were lightsabers. The sound of gravel crunching under heavy combat boots at all hours became the soundtrack to Vivian's final descent into madness. These rent-a-cops would shine flashlights through my windows at 2 a.m., apparently believing that sleep deprivation was a legitimate law enforcement technique. They'd positioned themselves on the property line like sentries guarding a prison camp, warning anyone who approached about dangerous elements in the area. "For your own safety, ma'am, I'd recommend staying away from that residence," I heard one tell Margaret when she tried to visit with homemade cookies. Margaret, bless her heart, told him exactly where he could stick his safety recommendations, using language that would make a sailor blush. Derek had apparently graduated from fake lawyer to master of police impersonation, coaching neighbors on how to file false domestic disturbance reports with enough detail to sound credible. Every few days brought squad cars to my door, officers rolling their eyes as they responded to reports of screaming matches and violent behavior that existed only in Derek's imagination. Body camera footage, which I later obtained through public records requests, showed these coached lies falling apart faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. Neighbors would describe terrible fights on nights when I'd been provably out of town or claim they'd witnessed property damage that security cameras showed never happened. Officer Martinez, who'd responded to at least 6 of these calls, finally pulled me aside after the latest false alarm. "Look, buddy," he said, adjusting his duty belt with the weary resignation of someone who'd seen this movie before. "I don't know what you did to piss these people off, but they're wasting everyone's time with this bullshit." That's when I learned something valuable about fighting corruption. Even the system can get tired of being abused. Police officers don't enjoy being used as weapons in personal vendettas, and prosecutors get annoyed when their time gets wasted on obviously fraudulent complaints. The financial pressure campaign reached new heights of creativity when my bank received anonymous tips about my stability as a borrower. Credit monitoring alerts started pinging my phone like a slot machine hitting jackpot, showing coordinated attempts to damage my rating through false reports and fabricated debt claims. My mortgage pre-approval got mysteriously canceled after character concerns raised by community members, forcing me to scramble for alternative financing. The loan officer looked embarrassed as she explained that multiple calls had warned them about my unstable behavior and history of property destruction. Here's something every property owner should know. Monitor your credit reports religiously during any legal dispute, because financial sabotage is a common weapon used by people who've run out of legitimate options. But Vivian's masterpiece of stupidity was the environmental sabotage. Someone dumped industrial chemicals near my dock overnight, creating an oily film that coated the boards like artificial death and killed enough fish to stock a small aquarium. The smell alone, petroleum mixed with decaying fish and the metallic tang of chemical contamination, would have made a garbage dump seem fragrant by comparison. Anonymous tips to the EPA claimed I was the source of pollution, leading to an investigation that would have been hilarious if it hadn't been so obviously orchestrated. The timing was perfect. Chemicals appear, fish die, phone calls blame me, government agents arrive with clipboards and serious expressions. Security cameras captured Derek's truck in the area during the exact time frame when the dumping occurred. License plate clearly visible under streetlight illumination. The EPA investigators took one look at the footage and went from accusatory to apologetic faster than you could say federal environmental crime. Legal escalation reached its peak when Vivian hired an actual attorney, the first smart thing she'd done in 3 years, to file an injunction against me. The complaint claimed my aggressive and threatening behavior created an atmosphere of fear that threatened community peace and safety. The filing fee, court records later revealed, was paid directly from HOA maintenance accounts without board authorization. Even when hiring legitimate legal help, Vivian couldn't resist stealing community funds to pay for her personal vendetta. The injunction sought to force me to maintain a 500-foot distance from all neighbors, essentially creating a restraining order that would make living on my own property impossible. It was legal creativity at its most malicious. If successful, I'd be forced to abandon my home while technically still owning it. But here's where Vivian's desperation finally betrayed her completely. The surveillance equipment she'd hired to monitor my property was professional-grade gear that cost more than most people's annual salary. Phone taps, internet monitoring, even laser microphones pointed at my windows, the full paranoid dictator package. My tech consultant took one look at the equipment specifications and started laughing. "This is law enforcement-grade surveillance," he said, pointing to serial numbers that traced back to a private investigation firm. "Either she's got federal connections, or she's spending HOA money like it's monopoly cash." The breaking point was approaching fast, and Vivian was about to discover that cornering someone with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous game you can play. The annual HOA meeting packed Crystal Shore Estates Community Center tighter than a can of sardines during a hurricane evacuation. 83 residents crammed into folding chairs, county commissioners lurking in the back like vultures circling roadkill, and Sally Blair's camera crew setting up equipment with the efficiency of a NASCAR pit crew. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps, casting harsh shadows across faces that ranged from curious to furious to terrified. The air smelled like nervous sweat mixed with the industrial carpet cleaning solution that couldn't quite mask 3 years of accumulated bullshit. Vivian strode to the podium wearing a power suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payment, carrying herself with the confidence of someone who still believed she could talk her way out of a federal investigation. Her opening slide appeared on the projection screen with the dramatic flourish of a magician revealing their final trick. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, voice carrying across the room like a trial lawyer delivering closing arguments, "we are gathered tonight to address a cancer that has been growing in our community for too long." The slide showed my property, but photographed and edited to look like a disaster zone. Strategic shadows, careful angles, and what appeared to be digital enhancement made my restored cabin look like something condemned by health inspectors. Even the lake behind it seemed somehow darker and more threatening. "This non-compliant structure threatens everything we've built here," Vivian continued, clicking to charts showing declining property values that existed only in her imagination. "Tonight, we vote to declare this property abandoned under community standards and transfer stewardship to responsible management." The audacity was breathtaking. She was attempting to steal my property through parliamentary procedure, right in front of county officials and television cameras. That's when I stood up, feeling like David approaching Goliath, except this time David had a briefcase full of evidence and a really good lawyer. "Point of order," I said, voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent months preparing for this exact moment. The room went silent except for the mechanical hum of the projector and someone's nervous breathing in the front row. "Before we vote on anything," I continued, walking toward the front with measured steps that echoed off the walls like a countdown timer, "I'd like to present some information that might be relevant to this discussion." Martha stood up in the third row, her arthritis-gnarled hands shaking as she held up a manila folder. "This is the original 1950 deed with the reversion clause that Vivian's been trying to trigger for 3 years. The collective gasp sounded like air escaping from a punctured balloon. Vivian's face went through several interesting color changes as residents realized they'd been watching a 3-year con game. County Commissioner Williams leaned forward in his back row seat, suddenly looking very interested in the proceedings. "Ma'am, could you explain what you mean by reversion clause?" Martha's voice carried across the room with the authority of someone who'd lived through 7 decades of local politics. "If Garrett abandons his property for 18 months, ownership automatically transfers to the county for auction. Vivian's been harassing him to force abandonment so her development partners could buy it cheap." The evidence cascade began like dominoes falling in perfect sequence. Sally Blair stood up, camera rolling, to address the room directly. "I'm Sally Blair from Channel 8 Investigative News. We've been following this story for 6 months." Her voice cut through the mounting tension like a knife through butter. "Our investigation has uncovered systematic fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy involving multiple county officials." Security footage began playing on the projection screen. Derek vandalizing my property, Vivian coaching neighbors to file false reports, cash payments to county inspectors. Each clip drew gasps, angry murmurs, and the sound of phones appearing as residents started recording everything. The financial bombshell came courtesy of forensic accountant David Blair, whose laptop connected to the projection system with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before. $340,000 embezzled from HOA accounts over 3 years, fake legal bills, phantom maintenance contracts, and personal expenses charged to the community. Papers rustled throughout the room as residents mentally calculated how much of their money had been stolen. The smell of anger was almost palpable, a mixture of adrenaline, betrayal, and the kind of rage that topples governments. But the coup de grace was the bribery recording. Vivian's voice filled the room through the sound system, crystal clear as she offered cash payments and admitted to conspiracy. The commissioners are on board. Property taxes will triple to fund infrastructure improvements for the resort project. You can't win this fight. Commissioner Williams stood up so fast his chair toppled backward with a crash that echoed like a gunshot. Mrs. Blackwood, you need to stop talking right now. You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly suggest you use it. The room erupted into chaos, residents shouting questions, cameras flashing, the sound of handcuffs clicking as sheriff's deputies moved toward the podium. Vivian stood frozen like a deer in headlights, her empire crumbling around her in real time. I walked to the microphone for my final statement, the words I'd been rehearsing for months. I bought a $5,000 fishing shack because I wanted to fix it up and watch sunrises over the lake. I never wanted to become a millionaire or fight corruption or stand up to bullies. I paused, looking directly at the camera. But sometimes life gives you exactly the fight you need, not the one you want. The applause started slowly, then built into a roar that shook the windows. Justice, when it finally arrives, tastes sweeter than Montana honey and hits harder than a freight train loaded with karma. Vivian and Derek faced a legal menu that read like a prosecutor's Christmas wish list. Federal fraud charges, state embezzlement prosecution, conspiracy to commit theft, practicing law without a license, and my personal favorite, impersonating a federal officer while wearing a costume that fooled absolutely no one. The HOA dissolution proceedings moved faster than gossip in a small town. Court-appointed administrators returned every stolen penny to residents, plus interest and penalties that left Vivian's bank accounts looking like a barren wasteland. Derek's fake legal empire crumbled overnight when the State Bar Association filed charges that carried enough prison time to make him seriously consider a career change. County commissioners who'd accepted development bribes discovered that federal investigators take corruption seriously, especially when it involves stealing private property through fraudulent government action. 3 resignations and 2 criminal indictments later, the entire county government got a much-needed attitude adjustment about whose interests they actually served. My property transformation became something Martha called poetic justice with lake views. The original fishing cabin remained exactly as Harold had built it in 1952, but expanded into an environmental education center where kids could learn about water conservation and property rights. The smell of cedar and fresh pine mixed with the excited chatter of school groups who visited every week to study lake ecology. The financial victory exceeded even my wildest expectations. Independent appraisal came back at $5.2 million for prime lakefront property with development rights. But here's the beautiful twist. I sold those development rights to Flathead County for public conservation, keeping the modest cabin where I could watch sunrise paint the lake gold every morning. The money went towards something Vivian never saw coming. A property defense fund that provides legal support for homeowners facing HOA harassment anywhere in Montana. Martha serves as fund advisor, sharing 70 years of wisdom about fighting bullies with people who never thought they'd need those skills. Community healing happened faster than anyone expected. The former harassment victims formed a cooperative management committee that actually serves residents instead of exploiting them. Margaret became our new community coordinator, organizing lake cleanup days and potluck dinners where people share stories about standing up to corruption. The memorial garden we planted near the community center features smooth river stones, each one representing a lesson learned about the importance of fighting for what's right. The inscription reads, "In memory of apathy, which died here when good people decided to act." My personal transformation surprised me most of all. The angry divorced veteran who bought a broken-down fishing shack became an accidental advocate for property rights reform. Speaking at county meetings about HOA transparency laws turned into a second career I never planned but somehow needed. The sound of children learning to fish from my refurbished dock provides the perfect soundtrack for healing. Their laughter mixed with lake water lapping against restored cedar planks creates a melody that erases 3 years of legal warfare and replaces it with something approaching peace. Sally Blair's investigation sparked statewide reform that made HOA financial audits mandatory and created verification requirements that prevent future Derek Blackwoods from playing dress-up lawyer. Her Pulitzer Prize nomination cited our case as the catalyst for exposing systemic corruption in community governance across 3 states. Vivian's complete downfall exceeded even my grandfather's definition of comeuppance. Blackwood Realty bankrupted by legal fees and fraud judgments, personal assets seized to compensate embezzlement victims, and a reputation so thoroughly destroyed that she fled Montana altogether. The hotel development deal collapsed when investors discovered their inside partner was heading to federal prison. But the real victory lives in moments like these. Watching Martha teach her great-granddaughter to bait hooks from the same dock where Harold caught dinner 70 years ago, seeing Margaret's husband Frank finally relax enough to enjoy retirement without fear of harassment, knowing that 43 families got their stolen money back, plus enough extra to fund community improvements they actually wanted. The mysterious phone call came last Tuesday. Desperate homeowner in California facing tax fraud designed to steal family farm property. I'm loading my truck for a cross-country drive, Road Atlas open to new adventures and fighting corruption wherever it needs fighting. Share your own HOA nightmare story in the comments. I read every single one, and some of you might hear from me personally when I'm driving through your neighborhood. Hit that subscribe button if you want to see me help more homeowners fight back against corrupt systems. Justice doesn't happen by accident, but sometimes it happens exactly when people decide they're tired of being pushed around.